If you weren't here last week, we started a new sermon series that talks about, that we're talking about zombies. I was a little leery of that. I told you last week, I don't like zombies. I don't like the zombie craze that's going around. I don't like being scared. So if somebody, James or back there, could you lower me just a little bit on the microphone? I'd appreciate it. Thank you. But Steve came up with this idea, and so we decided we're going to do it, and I got to admit that I kind of liked it once I started looking at this scripture. When we talk about zombies, of course, we're talking about people who are spiritually dead. The imaginary zombies that you see in the movies and all of that is a different thing altogether. And by the way, talking about bad jokes, what do you call a zombie who has lots of kids? A momster. What kind of zombie, what kind of food won't a zombie eat? Lifesavers. Where do zombies go swimming? Dead Sea. Where do most zombies live? Dead-end streets. What did the zombie say before his fight? You want a piece of me? What's a zombie's favorite meal? Manwich. Where do zombies go on cruises? The Mediterranean Sea. How do they smooth ice on a zombie hockey rink? With a zomboni. And what does it take to become a zombie? Dedication. Maybe it's that I don't need to go and learn to tell a joke. You guys need to learn how to hear one. Maybe that's it. Anyway, we've been talking about how it is that we have this wonderful God who loves to go into the graveyards of people's spiritual lives and bring them back to life. We talked about how God sometimes puts us in places like he did Ezekiel, and we talked about last week, where we can feel like we're in a strange place and we don't understand the reason for being there until God shows us that there are people there that need to hear what it is we have to share, the good news. Philippians says, don't merely look out for your own personal interests, but also look out for other people and their interest. And so what we do as Christians, what we're about as Christians, is supposed to be identifying who these folks are who need to know that there is a God who loves them and who supports them and who will care for them no matter what. And last week we looked at Ezekiel as we began talking about that, and I'm going to remind you of that as we look at the first 3 verses of chapter 37. It says that the hand of the Lord, quoting Ezekiel, was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in a valley, and it was full of dry bones. He held me back. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I said, O sovereign Lord, you alone know. And last week we talked about the fact that those bones did, as we read through the chapter, come back to life, that God created that he told Ezekiel to preach to these bones. And then look down at verses 11 and 12. Ezekiel continues and he says, Son of man, these bones are the house of Israel. They say our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We're cut off. Therefore, prophesy and say to them, it is what the sovereign Lord says, O my people. I'm going to open your graves and bring you up out of them, and I am going to bring you back to the land of Israel. And so Ezekiel does what he's told, and God does what he can, and people do come from the dead to life again. But how is it that a person becomes a zombie? Steve mentioned earlier that people become zombies when they are bitten in the movies and all of that. But how do you become a zombie spiritually? I want us to look at a man in the Old Testament by the name of Jacob. He became a zombie. And I want to look at how it is that occurred in his life. And we'll begin by looking at first at Genesis 47. And I'm going to start in verse 5. And I want you to follow along with me as I illustrate this life of Jacob and how a person can become a zombie spiritually. Beginning in Genesis 47, verse 5, Pharaoh looked at Joseph. So your father and brothers have arrived. A reunion. Now, let me stop for a minute. Remember what's going on. Joseph winds up, one of Jacob's sons, winds up in Egypt. Through a bunch of circumstances, he becomes the head over the granary and the provisions of the nation of Egypt. It happens that they go into this severe worldwide famine, and Egypt is the only one that's fixed for that because Joseph is taking care of it. Eventually, Jacob and his family come to this land and discover that Joseph is really alive still after his brothers tried to sell him off. And so Jacob comes, sees his son who is alive after all these years, thinking him dead. And Pharaoh looks at him in the verse that I read to you and says, "Hey, your brothers and your father have arrived, a reunion." Then he says in verse 6, Pharaoh, "Egypt welcomes them. Settle your fathers and your brothers on the choicest land. Yes, give them Goshen. And if you know any among them that are especially good at their work, put them in charge of my own livestock." And so Joseph brought his father and Jacob in, introduced him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob answered Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130, a short and hard life, and not nearly as long as my ancestors were given." And then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left. Joseph settled his father and brothers in Egypt and made them proud owners of choice land. It was the region of Ramesses, that is, Goshen, just as Pharaoh had ordered. Joseph took good care of them, his father and his brothers, and all of his father's family, right down to the smallest baby. He made sure that they had plenty of everything. But listen to what's happening here. Jacob thinks his son is dead. He's thought that for all these years. His family now is in this famine and he's starving. Not only does he discover his son lives, but he discovers that his son is in charge of all this bounty of food and will take care of him and watch over him and will provide for not just Jacob, but his brothers and their families and everything like this. Jacob should have been shouting for joy, shouldn't he? He should have been like that father of the prodigal in the New Testament in Luke chapter 15 when he says, "Hey, bring out the fatted calf. Let's kill it. Let's cook it up. Let's eat it. And let's eat, drink, and be merry. Because my son was dead, but look, he's alive again. He was lost, but look, he's found." That's what Jacob should have been feeling. How come he wasn't? Instead, what does Jacob say? "The years of my life are kind of short, not nearly as long as my ancestors." Jacob had become a very negative, miserable old man. He'd become a spiritual zombie. How do they get that way? How do people become zombies in life? Well, if you look at the life of Jacob, the first thing you notice is that he had all kinds of self-inflicted wounds. There were lots of things about Jacob that he did to himself that made him become a person who didn't have any hope or any joy in his life. The first wound was lying to his father. The way you treat your parents often might come back to haunt you. When my dad had prostate surgery a long time ago, my two brothers and I were in the hospital room. We're trying to make my dad laugh, and so we're teasing him about having prostate surgery. And we're really teasing him. We're just really laying it on thick. And the nurse comes in, and she says, "I hope I'm nursing here when you three come in for your prostate surgeries." Because she says, "You're miserable to him." Sometimes what goes around comes around. Self-inflicted wounds are nagging little things. They nip at your heels. They bite at you. They gnaw at you. They're things that are there. Even if the thing is past, it's still there. It still affects you. And that was the case for Jacob in his relationship with his father. He was wounded by cheating his brother. He cheated his brother out of his inheritance. He lived in fear of his brother for the next 20 years. He had a wound that nagged at him all those years. He was wounded self-inflictingly when he failed to be a proper example for his children. In Genesis 34 and 35, if you've ever read this, maybe you've puzzled over this. In Genesis 34 and 35, Jacob's daughter is abducted by some men from Shechem, and she is raped, and she is molested and treated very poorly. And in revenge, Jacob's sons go out and kill these men who were responsible for this. And when Jacob is asked to give a response to that, do you know what his response is? Put away your idols. That's what he tells his kids. Put away your idols. Apparently, up till now, even though Jacob is supposed to be the one carrying the message of God in this world, he's allowing his kids to walk around and keep idols in their houses. Somehow it's dawned on Jacob that maybe the way I've been living and encouraging my kids to live isn't the way God wants me to live. And now his daughter has paid this huge penalty. Self-inflicted wounds. That's how you become a zombie. When you all of a sudden learn and decide that maybe I haven't been doing it the way I should have. When I was in college, I used to go to the prisons in Michigan and preach and be there on Sundays. You know that some of the most sincere, heartfelt, passionate prayers that I have ever heard in my life were given by guys who were locked up. You know why? They don't have anything left but to pray for that. You tell a guy that he might spend the next 3 lifetimes in prison, he can pray, boy. He can pray. Now, he may not be, he's sincere when he's saying that prayer. He may not allow his life to be changed, but he is so low on hope that he's grasping at anything. How do you become a zombie? Well, you inflict these wounds on yourself. It's the law of sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. Jacob cheated on his family cheated on him. He lied to his family family lied to him. He failed to love his wife failed to love him. If you want to become a zombie, start inflicting wounds on yourself that don't heal. The second way Jacob became a zombie was because of this catastrophic losses he dealt with in his life and had no resources to handle them. Everyone from time to time deals with things in their life that are tough, don't they? Don't we all deal with those things that are tough, things that we'd rather not be going through? Family situations, job situations, different things that are going on with our health. We struggle with those things. The problem is that if we don't have resources to handle those things, they begin to pile up on us. And they get overwhelming. And pretty soon we're acting like zombies walking around, not knowing where to turn.